New to app registrations, does the link between app registration, service principals, and enterprise applications confuse you? Or are you just here for the vibes? Well, my goal today is to unpack these things and really try to demystify the links between them. App registrations or service principals are basically non-user accounts that we in operations can use for authorization and authentication into our services. We'll explore the differences between app registrations, service principals, and how operations teams use them as service identities, but really anyone. We'll explore generating secrets and storing them in key vaults, including how to call those key vaults whenever we want to use those secrets. We will also continue where we left off with Graph and use these as our identities. For authentication, we'll explore both the Graph module route as well as the token API route. For authorization, we'll explore app permissions this time, instead of the delegated permissions like we did in the last episode. And since there's no limit to how many app registrations you can use and make, etc., we'll actually make them for specific app roles, such as sending emails as one, managing EntraID with another, and then having a SharePoint one that can do stuff in SharePoint. Everything here will prepare us for identities that we can use for Graph in runbooks. So without further ado, let's begin. Okay, let's begin. Actually, before I begin, I just wanted to highlight that there are two portals. There's the EntraID Admin Center, and then what we used in the last episode, which is when we were in Azure, we went to EntraID. And it's basically the same thing. Like if you see the menu here, I can click app registrations. But if I'm here, I can do the same thing. And the page it will take me to is exactly the same, right? Microsoft loves their portals, but I get it. Some organizations don't really use Azure, so why have them navigate into Azure just to get to EntraID? Either way, we're going to stick with Azure portal. So in our context, app registrations or service principals, identities that we can use instead of our own user accounts to do stuff in Azure or EntraID, SharePoint, etc., etc., etc. Like before, we used the managed identity of our automation account back in episode 2. That didn't require a password, better yet, a secret or a certification, since they were tied to the compute service of the automation account. This time, our service principal will not be tied to any compute. This means we can test things right inside Visual Studio Code using that account. But then also when we use an automation account and put it inside runbooks, it can also authenticate with the same account. Like I said in the introduction, to anything to do with Azure itself, not EntraID, we're still going to use the managed identity because it already has the RBAC roles we need. But if we wanted to, we really could use one of these. And it's just to keep our options open. I'll be interacting with Microsoft Graph in our future runbooks using this identity as our authentication authorization to those services. All right, so let's break down app registrations first. I think the best way to explain is to dive right in and explain as I go. So what we'll do is when we go to EntraID, we'll click app registrations. I'm already on that page, but once you click this, you'll come to this screen right here. And you can see there's a section called all applications. It shows you all the applications you have, owned ones that you are the owner of, and then deleted applications in case you want to revert them back or permanently delete them, right? In here, what we'll do is we'll create a new app registration and I'll walk you through the process and then we'll kind of slowly unpack what it is and all that. So let's click new app registration and it'll take you to this page. It's pretty straightforward. We just give it a name. Basically what my goal for the first identity we're going to make here is that I'm going to make one that manages everything in EntraID. This is talking about users, groups, apps themselves that we're making here, as well as service principals / enterprise applications that I'll explain shortly. So anything to do with app EntraID, my goal is to make this powerful enough to interact and do stuff to it. So I just have a naming format. It's up to you what you do. I call it SP for service principal, -IT for my department. And then what it is that the application's interacting with or working on, I'm going to say the word graph. And then what is it doing? Well, it's identity, as in EntraID. And the work that it's doing is reading and writing to all. Recall when we were doing earlier, user.read, write, all. This is basically me saying that, but also implying other stuff in EntraID, like groups, apps, etc. Everything else you can pretty much leave the same. This just means that if you want this app to only exist in this tenant, multiple tenants, etc., etc., final thing is like what page will it take you to when you try to authenticate with this account? but we can ignore that. It's not that important for what we're trying to do. Hit create, and it takes me to this page. Now, once it's created, it gives you an ID. So if you see here, it's two IDs. One is the object ID, one is the application client ID. You can think of client ID as a digital footprint, almost like a UPN. And then you can think of object ID as the user ID, right? So this is like your username equivalent data. And then you'll see all these sections here. We're only going to explore a few of them. So the first one, let's just get out of the way, is who's going to own this app. And I'll just add myself right there. So I'll just click yes. And then I'll add my colleague Lee. So we're both the owners of this application. This means that we are able to modify what's here, as well as get notified if you ever make alerts. So when we make alerts in the future against app registrations, these are the people that are going to be notified. Kind of like how in tags we had owner 1 and owner 2 in episode 2. Same idea. And there's other sections. This is where you can generate a secret, so like a password, or if you want it to be certificate based, or if you want something called federated credentials. We're not going to touch federated credentials today because that is more about connecting third-party services directly in. And then when I go to API permissions, recall in the last graph episode that we had scopes, right? So we assigned scopes to a user so that they could be able to do user read write all or group read write all, et cetera, et cetera. This is where you can assign that for the app. And I will come back to this later. There are other sections as well, but this is pretty much everything we will deal with when we're working with Graph. All right, so that's the app registration. What's interesting is when you create an app registration in your tenant, it also creates something called a service principal. And that service principal sits in something called enterprise application. That's all enterprise application is. It's a place where service principals sit. So you may hear me use the word app registration and service principal interchangeably because they are. You can think of enterprise applications as the management layer for your app's consents and permissions. So when we, in our last episode, when we interacted with a service principal for Graph API by using connect MG Graph, we added scopes and we got that pop-up that told us what permissions we're going to get. And because we were admins, we were able to accept it. That was the consent granted in enterprise applications, not the app registration itself. So if we go to enterprise applications, and then similar in the sense that you can see that the thing I just created is here as well, right? So this is what we just created in app registration. But you'll see there's way more stuff here. In fact, if I click here and select all applications, there is an endless amount of stuff. There's some that are owned by Microsoft. Even your managed identities show here. But if I go back to the first page, you'll see something called Microsoft Graph Command Line Tools. I click this and I come here to permissions and I go to user consent. You'll see here all the scopes for Graph that were provided to accounts. So in our case, when we were using Graph last time, we gave ourselves user read write all, group read write all, directory read, and a few more. But if I click, let's say user read write all, and I click this one total users, you will see my name here. So when I added scopes and hit enter and I consented, et cetera, my name got added here. Same thing will happen when other people are added. They will also be added here. So that is all enterprise application is. There's an app registration that gets created. And when you have the app registration created, it creates an enterprise application. And then when somebody wants to interact with that app, for example, Graph, it's going to go to its enterprise application and request access. And then admins will have to grant that access and it will show up here and then they're good to go to use that app. And recall when we just made an app registration earlier. Let me just go back to that screen real quick. When we go to app registration, we click new. Let me click new. You'll see an option here to basically have it connect to multiple tenants. The reason I want to highlight that is technically Graph isn't something we made. Graph is something made by Microsoft. So at some point, Microsoft made an app registration in their tenant called Microsoft Graph, and then they made it multi-tenant in the sense that all these other EntraID tenants like mine and yours, etc., can use that service. One other difference between app registrations and enterprise applications is that you only make an app registration once and you make it in your main tenant. But then if you want to give other companies and organizations access to that app, you will grant them an enterprise application service principal. But when I'm in app registration, there's nothing here about Graph. This is only the stuff I created. But when I'm in enterprise applications, you see so many of these Microsoft ones. So they basically granted us all of these service principals to be able to interact with different services like Graph, like Azure APIs, et cetera, right? And in Microsoft Intune, there's so many here. You're like, just go down this list. It's just endless. There's like 400 items in here. Okay, let's go back to our app registration. And let's click it. Now, why don't we generate a secret? So this will be our password. So whenever we use this account, we'll authenticate with this secret. So you go to certificates and secrets. And in this section, you will see a button called new client secret. All you do is click it, and then it'll let you type a description and then an expiration date. That means you'll have to rotate them and renew them and all of that. This stands as a challenge because our passwords will expire, of course. You won't be able to use them if you still use the old password that expired. It's a good control to have because anyone with your tenant ID, client ID, and client secret will be able to authenticate as these accounts if we're not careful. The expiry helps limit this risk. I will note that there are no alerts by default that inform you when the secrets are about to expire. So you and everybody else in your organization could miss this if they're not monitoring this. And one of the scripts I plan to show you will demonstrate how you can send alerts. To whom? The owners of the app registrations like we just made. So then they're informed, hey, their secret's about to expire in 2 weeks. Act now. Replace it and then generate a new one. And if all these secrets are sitting in a secret manager like Key Vault, never to be used by people, but just automations, I'll show you an even cooler script even further down the road where we'll just create an entire renewal process where we don't even interact or worry about the secrets. Meaning that when a secret is about to expire, we'll automatically generate a new one and then store it in Key Vault. And then all the automations that are using Key Vault to get that secret are just always going to have the new one coming in. Yeah, so, right. So when you're creating a secret, just type a description, give it a month, length. So when you create your secret, EntraID will display it in plain text right there, as you can see right here. This is the only time you will see it. Make sure to copy it and put it somewhere safe. I hit refresh, it's gone. But if that's the case and you didn't copy it, it's not the end of the world. Just create a new one and copy that and delete the first one. That easy to keep generating. And you can have multiple as you just saw. Just copy it over. If you can use a Key Vault, put it there. I'm going to delete these for now. Let's keep this page open and I'm going to open another tab. And what we're going to do is make a service where we can actually store these secrets, which happens to be Key Vault. So first thing I'll do is let's go to our subscriptions. And let's go to our management subscription where we're going to store all of our management services. And I'm going to create a new resource group here and we'll hit create. And in the marketplace, create a Key Vault. In access configuration, I'm going to use role-based. Not a fan of access policies. Wherever I can, I will avoid it. Much easier to use RBAC. We've already used it already. In episode 2, we already used it. And here we have our Key Vault. RBAC means we need to assign our permissions. I'm just going to add myself because if I go to secrets, I don't actually have access right now. Just like storage accounts, you need to give it a data plane access. You need to do the same thing here. I'm just going to give myself a pretty powerful role, Key Vault administrator. I'll give it to myself. I'll give it to my friend. And one more thing I'll do is, because in the future, our automation account's going to come here. I'm also going to give it a role to be able to read secrets. So let's just search a more limited role. Maybe we just wanted to be able to read the secret. So we'll select that one, which is secrets user. And I'll give this to our managed identity of our automation account. We're not going to touch our automation accounts today, but let's just do it since we're here. Okay, so we have that. Now let's create some secrets. Go to secrets, click generate/import, and it will take you to this page. You have upload options, it's manual at this point. So let's just call it tenant ID. And secret value, this is what you store the credential itself. I'm going to put the tenant ID. And the content type, this is like a description, tenant ID for, and then if this was a secret that's expiring and all that, you could add that stuff as well. If you want to disable it and use it later, you can do that. If you want to add tags, you can do that, but this is fine for me. And there it is. Our secret is created. If I click it, it will actually give us additional RBAC. So if you wanted to have something access just this one secret, instead of assigning it at the key vault level, you could assign it right here, and it'll be designed now to only be able to read the secret it has access to and none of the other ones. So there's a secret right there. As we replace the secret, add new, you'll see more of these lists show up. So if I click this, it will give us that description that we saw earlier. And then the secret stored here. And if I press this, I can actually see it in plain text and copy it. And if I want to generate a new one, I'm just going to paste the same secret as before, ID description again, and hit create. And there it is. It'll create the historical record as well. So that's one nice thing about Key Vaults is in case somebody changes the password and it breaks, you can always go back. So let's leave this page open and let's go back to our app registration where we're going to create a secret. Back to our app, I'm going to go to secrets. And I'm going to do a generate new. Expire 6 months is fine. Ideally, you should keep it nice and short. Don't make it too long, like 2 years. That defeats the purpose. I generated it. Values here. I copied it with that little icon. Came here. I said generate new secret. Secret here. And then one thing I like to do is I like to use the name of the service principal as the name here, just so we know as soon as we read the name, oh, okay, this is the secret for this. And then if you need to describe it more in the description, you can say app registration ID if you really want to narrow it down in case somebody else makes another app with the same name. Can do, by the way. Then we'll put the application ID, not the object ID. And there it is. We have our secret. In PowerShell, I'll be able to retrieve this, and so will my automation account. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually store like the client ID here too. So you can have one row for the client ID, one for client secret, and then everything's read from Key Vault. I'm not going to do that, but you can. I think having the tenant ID and then the password itself is enough. Like, what are you really going to do with my client ID, right? All right, so in the last episode, I also showed you scopes, and I just kind of highlighted it here. If I go to API permissions, this is where I can grant them. Say this service principal, I wanted to be able to manage EntraID, and I wanted to grant it some permissions. What you do is you press add a permission and it'll open this page. And there's a lot of different apps you can interact with. It's not just Graph, right? You can even have your own custom apps from your org and all that. I'm just going to click this big icon here for Graph itself. You'll see the same thing that we did last time, which was the delegated permissions, where a signed in user used it rather than unattended automation. And today we're going to explore application permissions because that's our goal here, which is this identity just has access. It will authenticate and be able to access stuff, not some signed in user. So when you're in this page, you press application permissions, and then it'll give you a list. Same thing happens if you press delegated. It just has different options. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grant a few permissions from before. Now you could just scroll down and find the stuff, or in the search here, you can just type user.readWrite.all. So I'm going to click the word user, and that's where the user read write all that we use in the graph episode. So I'll grant that. And while I'm here, rather than just adding, I can add more. So we'll continue. So we'll say group read write.all. Same thing here. Accept that. Also do application read write all this time. This means that this can manage app registrations as well as service principals. Accept. Finally, just so we can navigate the directory, I'll say read all. And I'll hit accept. When I hit accept, all of them will show up as a list. All of them are not accepted yet. Like I said, even last time, when somebody requests access, they get that pop-up, and then the admin has to grant it for them. We just happen to be the admin, so we could do it ourselves. The same thing is happening here. So this app just requested all these permissions, and we're going to grant it by pressing this button. Some actually don't even require it. So like user read does not require an admin to grant them access, but all these other ones, an admin has to basically grant it. So I'll press that. And if I click this, what's going to happen is the service principal within enterprise application for Graph, that object, it will grant it in there for this app. I'll just hit grant. yes. And there it is. Now this app has these permissions. Be mindful whenever we add permissions to grant it, otherwise it will not work. And we already have owners, so we're pretty much ready with this account. Now we have access to the directory, users, groups, app registration, and service principals. Why don't we switch over to Visual Studio Code and start seeing this in action? Create a new file. Let's just call it appdemo.ps1. Now we are going to connect as ourselves first, connect AZ account. And the reason is we have a secret in a key vault. If I wanted to sign in as a service principal, I need to go to that key vault first and retrieve that secret and then use that to authenticate to Microsoft Graph. The same thing will happen in our automation account. Like I said, it will have its managed identity. It'll authenticate to Azure. Then it'll retrieve the secret from key vault. And then in the script, it will authenticate to Graph. So I'll just run connect AZ account. Corporal management, because that's where our key vault is. And the first thing we'll do is command called get AZ key vault. If I run this, this is just going to list out all the key vaults we have. This is the key vault we're going to connect to. Why don't we do this? Say this is a variable. And then in order to get a secret, if I do some tabs, I can start seeing all the different commands. Get AZ key vault secret. And then the values you need to provide is, okay, which key vault? So that will be our key vault name, and the name of the secret. We had one called tenant ID. Tenant ID. This is what we get back. Well, that's not the secret. That's just the object, right? If you want the actual value itself, you do something called as plain text at the end. And then if you run F8, there it is. This is the secret value. So if you ever want to get something from Key Vault, from PowerShell, this is the command right here. Give it a Key Vault name, you give it the name of the secret, and then you say as plain text, and that will give you the value so you can actually store it. And we can say tenant ID equals this. So now it's in a variable. So now we also had our other secret. If I go back, client ID, client name equals this. I'll say client ID, and then we'll say client secret equals. Now, because this is a credential that's going to be used, you're going to use convert to your string. We're going to make a cred. Username, client name, client secret as the password. All we do, we want to connect to Azure with this account, or Microsoft Graph with this account, is connect to MG Graph. E is tenant ID, client secret credential is correct. Okay, makes sense. We get the key vault name. For that, with that, we get the tenant ID so that we can use it for our connect MG Graph. We have the client name and the client ID stored as plain text, which we could use to reference our client ID, right, with the client name, as it's the same. And then we make our creds with the client ID and then the client secret. And then we use that to connect to Microsoft Graph. If I run that, connected, perfect. There's no pop-up, nothing. I didn't have to provide scopes because we already did that in EntraID. We are authenticated. And if I do get MG group, because it has the permissions to access users, groups, etc., there it is. Now let me show you another way. So this is using credentials with connect MG Graph. This is something we're always going to use. So this is always a standard, but it's just instead of doing connect MG Graph and then letting it handle the token, what if we want to handle the token? We do an API route, do the same thing. Instead of passing in credentials, we pass in a token that we generate. In order to do that, we have to do an API call. API call is just an invoke REST method. What will we put in the body? I'm just using Microsoft to retrieve a token, but I'm actually going to get a token for Graph and nothing else. Finally, grant type. So this will give us a connection. So let's run this. I'll just show you what happens. Oh, okay. We don't need to do this anymore for this part. That, cool. So if I open connection, you're going to see the access token is right there. That's really what we want from this. It's a token equals connection token. This is where we will run. Then we'll do connect MG graph. Instead of providing all that information, we'll just say access token. Here's the token. Same thing. We're going to be using APIs a lot in the future, so might as well just start getting familiar with it, right? So we pretty much do the same thing here to get the secret, get the client ID, get the tenant ID, et cetera, et cetera. And then once we have all the information, we put it in the body as well as the URI. And then we just run invoke REST method to get the token. And then we use that token to connect to graph. Same thing, different route, right? Okay, so why use this versus this, right? This is working. Why not just stick with that? It's less lines. I mean, why use creds? Well, let's graph handle all the API work for you. It does make the token like we just did here on the background. We just don't deal with it directly since we're using a module. You just have no control over it. Why use the token? Well, if you use a token, unlocks the ability to use invoke REST method or invoke MG REST method, where you can use a token to make further API web requests. Rather using get MG user, we can make web requests to do that. And then the power of that is, again, you don't have to use PowerShell. You can use any language. Another power of that is you don't need the module. So because you don't need the module, you can run it from any computer, provided it can do web requests. Up to you which one you use. I prefer the second method. It gives us more flexibility. I'll explain it more when we explore APIs in future episodes. If you're new to APIs, don't worry. We're going to cover it, I promise. Just think of it as me subliminally injecting APIs as an idea to you if you're not used to it. And if you ever want to see who you're connected as, you always do connect MG context. If I press that, scroll up, you can see, okay, well, I'm connected as this account. And it even tells you what scopes you have. So if you're having issues and you're like, oh, why is it not working? You can look at the scopes and be like, oh, okay, because they don't have blah, blah, blah. To get app registrations like we used, do a command called get MG application. And it has all, just like all other commandlets. These are all the app registrations you saw earlier. Same thing is true for service principal / enterprise application. Get MG service principal. If I run that, there's a list. And if I wanted to search our particular application, I can just use this. Let's run that. There is our app. Now you see that there's two identities, right? There's the app identity and then there's the ID. All when we were at the app, there was two kinds, right? There's the application ID and then there's the object ID. If I do get MG application and hit tab and on the first switch, you'll see something called application ID. Okay, that makes sense. There's an app ID and there's an ID. It's looking for the application ID. So let's search this. It doesn't work. But if I use the ID, aka the object ID, it works. Confusing, I know. And I agree. I hate the odd choice of words here as well. Like just call this object ID, right? But I thought I'd share that with you so you don't hit the same roadblock that I did when I first started working with these. So what if you wanted to search from the actual application client ID? What you can do instead is filter. And as you know, it's called app ID. So what we'll search is app ID equals, we'll quote. All right. Let's save this as a variable called app. Now, what if you wanted to see the owners? Another command for that, get MG application owner ID. Now, because we saved it as a variable, we can do app.id. Again, like our last episode, it shows you as user IDs. So what we need to do is search the same place as we did for groups. This is the OData stuff again. All this owners equals that. Now, what if you wanted to see the secrets, right? You want to get some data on the secrets. Obviously not the secret values, but everything else like name, expiration. So you can actually search within app. Like if we look at app itself, a whole bunch of sections. The one we want is called password credentials. App, password credentials. And there they are. Display name, end time. End time being when they're going to expire. Let's save this as secrets. By the way, create another secret here. Play around with it. Okay, so we have the app. We're going to get the owners. We're going to get the secrets. Do that. Great. Now if I open secrets, we should see two things, secret 1, secret 2. If I want to extract that data out, I wanted to get the end date time. Why don't we try to make a hash table? So this is us initializing an empty hash table. And what I'm going to do is, rather than making a hash table where I actually have like data, right? Like in the past we did name equals some value and then blah, 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 right? What we're going to do is we're going to say to dynamically create the hash table. So the keys are dynamically created and the values are dynamically created. So the way to do that is, let's say for each, and we can do a secret in secrets that we have here. And what we're going to do is basically say key equals value, just to give you pseudocode, right? And the way to do a key is actually mention the word secret expiry, so where you're going to store it. Then you're going to put square brackets, and then whatever value you add in the square brackets is going to be the key, which in our case, value that's stored in secret.displayName. And the value is, well, secret dot here, display name, end time, and date time. Now if I run this, perfect. Yeah, there it is. So we have the name and then we have the values. Okay, so what about the scopes that's been assigned to this app, right? I'm just using the word scope because that's what we did in the last episode. It's technically called role when it's an application permission. Scopes are delegated permission. So how do you get the data that we have here? Like, what if I want to collect this data about an app, right? This is where we actually go back to service principles. So recall what it is. Maybe I'll draw it out. This app registration is getting access to graph roles / this here app registration that is getting access to another app that is owned by somebody else that is in our tenant, and it is a enterprise application / service principal, and it's getting the permissions for it to be able to do stuff using it, right? This is this app getting access to this app. But we already have this data. What we want to do is go into here and see what roles and scopes this app has for it. And we'll do just that. You can actually see it in the app itself. If I do required resource access, what is it? What is that? 00030000. All right. What does that mean? Let's actually look at it. I go to EntraID and I go to enterprise applications. I search graph. There it is, right? You see this and you're like, oh, that's all there is in that field. Always check with format list. You never know what you'll find. This is saying on this app, because you can have multiple apps that you have access to, right? Not just graph, but other things. On this app, this resource has access to all of these different roles / scopes. If I go to resource access, here's all the roles in the one scope, right? One scope and the 4 roles, all for graph. So all of these roles and this one scope is for this one enterprise application called graph. But this is, again, very cryptic. We don't have OData this time. How do you get this data? Leave this for now. Let's do this. Service principal ID. These are all the permissions. Perms ID. We have these 2 variables saved. That's probably a better approach. You really want to make sure that if you have multiple apps that you're also accounting for that. Next thing we'll do is call getMG service principal command. We'll do filter, and the reason why is actually this is not its object ID. This is its application ID. On this, just to confirm. And what I'll do for this is store it as SP itself. What are we looking for? Delegated scopes and application roles, right? Let's make another hash table like we just did here. Something similar. I'll just show you a different way. We can say permissions equals hash table, and then we can just give it the key names that we want. Detail delegated equals array. Application equals array. Put in one line. Let's do that. That's basically what I just did. We're saying these are the 2 keys in this hash table I'm going to have. And in the keys, you're going to put all the values in an array. Now we have a lot of perm IDs, right? If I go here, There's a whole bunch. I want to go through each and I want to collect what their names are because this is too cryptic for me. I want to know if it's user read, write all, etc., right? So what I'll do is I'll do a for each and we'll do perm in perm's ID. Let's use if statement first. So if perm dot type equals scope. Right, we could write it like this. Switch allows us to just switch it up a little, but to do the same thing. Just make some spaces clear. Instead of writing it like this and then filling out all your stuff, what you can say is switch perm type. So look for what's in here. And then if what's in there is scope, do this. If what inside is role, do this. And then you can add more, but that's all we really are going to get anyway. So let's just stick with that. And then what we can put in here, this is, if it does equal scope, we're gonna have to look in something called scope, SP, so if you do format list, the graph has a whole bunch of stuff inside of it too. One of the things I wanna mention, OAuth permission scope. This is all of the scope related stuff. If I open this, kind of hard to read, so let's do format list, stop it, Control C. So you can see one of these objects is describing what it is, but then the most importantly is giving you the value, which is, like user.read_write_all. So that's what we want. So that's for scopes. Now, if you want to get the apps, it's the same thing, but a little different. There's an ID associated with it, and then there's values associated with it. What we're going to do is add to our hash table that we're trying to make here. Permissions equals sp.where object. We're going to look for a particular one. ID, where its ID matches what we have in perm. It loops through, it's going to have a particular ID. Here, this. Another mistake, I was adding it at the hash table level. We're actually trying to add it to the keys. Okay, there, finally. Go to permissions. So for this app that we've been searching on to get the owners at the secrets, now we're able to get all of its permissions as well. That kind of gives you the gist of how it works. Either way, let's move forward. Why don't we make a proper script out of what I said earlier about getting apps, secrets, and all that. All right, first thing we're gonna do, copy this. Provider. We authenticate again. And you notice I use the word app. That's because now we're going to do all of them. Apps. We're going to make a generic list. Object equals. We're going to do for each app and apps. Take that owner line that we have here. Just because something has owners doesn't mean it always will. So we can actually do an if statement. This is a cool way to do an if statement. Just leave the body empty. What this will do is if there is values in here, it's going to fill owner's UPN. Otherwise, it's going to be null. So you don't have to do something in the body if you can just do it in the if statements query. We have this handy little thing here. Take that. Now, some secrets may actually not have a display name. So if we try to add it here, it's actually going to break. The thing we want to do, leave this as is. Just put the word if secret. So if there is a value in display name, we're going to do exactly what we already did. Add it like this. But if it doesn't exist, instead of using the display name, we'll just say the word none. This will catch both. That's a lot of ifs, right? Why don't I show you something called null coalescence? Instead of all this, I'm just going to comment it out. I'm just going to comment it out. What you can do instead is the same thing. You initialize your hash table. Also do the for each as well. And here, if There is a secret. Do this. And what do we do? Secret expiry. So this may fail because the display name doesn't exist. But if you say if it doesn't exist, you can do something called question mark, null coalescing. So it's either this, if it exists, doesn't exist, it's this. Yeah, that's it. This would work the same way as this. Pretty cool. All right, and then finally, since we have our object, let's pull our data together. And there it is. Think about what we just collected here. We have the apps, we have who the apps belong to, aka the owners, and their secrets expiring. This is a hard thing to manage for an org since you can't automate it through the portal or anything like that. But you could use this data in automation account to have an alert that whenever it checks this periodically and whenever these are about, let's say 2 weeks from expiry, it sends emails to these people letting them know, hey, your app's about to expire, renew it. It's a small list here, but your org can have hundreds, if not thousands of these apps. And it's a great way to just be ahead of that. Now, nobody has to remember when their secrets are going to expire in your organization. You have to make sure owners are up to date. All right, so that is getting stuff. Why don't we make stuff now? Make an application is pretty straightforward. Paul, when we first made it, all we really did was assign it a display name, and that was it. Equals, I don't know, test app, create new application, and it uses the body parameters, and then you fill in that. If I run this, that is enough. App has been created. All apps, test app create. Cool. Let's say you want to take a step further. What if you wanted to add owners at the same time? You could do new MG application owner and then fill out whatever. Or you can use our old friend OData and say owners at odata.find equals UPN. I want to show something. This method that we just used, it's actually missing one step that gets added in the portal. So if you're going to make an app, and I'll show that in the next example. Last time when we made that read write all identity one, it showed up as an enterprise application as well. The ones I just created, the app test, they're not showing up. That's kind of weird, right? Because we go back to our app registration and then we open the test app create to. This section here automatically gets created when you make it on the portal, but when you run that command we just did, it does not. Well, you'll have to do one additional step in order to add that part. But if you've already created it, you can press create service principal and it will do it. Anyways, let's move forward and I'll show you from here. Let's actually make an app registration that I actually want to use. Move all this. All right, so what I want to do is I want to create a service principal that's going to manage every single SharePoint. Name is going to follow my standard. The app name equals spit graph SharePoint read write all. And I'll do graph sp. I'm going to grab the service principal of graph. That's why I wrote that. Same thing as we did earlier, but instead of using the ID, I'm using the name. Now what I want to do is I want to assign this guy roles, right? So I can't just provide sites read write all. I need to provide it an ID. So I need to go to the graph module service principal and collect that ID. What we'll do is role ID equals sp.approles. Remind you again, all the roles, right? Particular one I want is where object value equals sites read write all. This, right? That's the one object. I really just want the ID, so now if I run this, ID, there it is. Next is let's build up params. Then permissions, how do we add them? Required resource access equals this. So it's an array collection of hash tables. We're only adding one. So what we're going to do is for graph, we'll just do resource app ID equals app ID, and then resource access equals also an array, because if you recall, it could have multiple scopes and roles, right? And this is also a hash table, so we'll do ID equals role ID that we captured here, And what kind is it? Is it a scope or is it a role? It's a role. And then we'll create our app. So we'll say app equals parameters. Params. Not done. Yeah, I'm trying to go crazy here. So I'm going to make an app. I'm going to assign it owners. I'm going to assign it permissions. I'm going to store its secrets in Key Vault. And then finally, I'm going to set it up so that it already has a service principal created. So you see it in enterprise applications as well. The other two things I'm going to do here is actually post creation. And that's why I'm saving it as a variable. Once I save it as a variable, I do secret equals add. This is how you create a secret. MG application password, application ID. This is app ID, aka it's object ID. And then what is the password we're going to create, or a secret we're going to create? That's going to be also a hash table. I'm just going to leave it in one line. Name. All right, secret will be the name. And then we need an end date time. That date. And we also get date in here, part of the name. All right, so this will make us a secret. That's going to be a name like secret, year, month, day. And then this will set the expiration date to, let's see, 3 months in the future. Okay, so that's cool. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to store in the key vault. This is what we had earlier. So let's do the same thing. Set AZ key vault secret is how we add one. Vault name is key vault name. And then we can say name of the secret is going to be the app name. Perfect. And then the secret value is going to be basically a thing called secret dot. That's going to actually have the secret. You have to convert it to your string. Z as plain text. And finally, what I mentioned earlier was when we create app registrations from PowerShell, it doesn't create an enterprise application. If you want that, you got to basically run one command. Just a new MG service principal. App ID is going to be our app.appID. We're referencing an existing app. And then add something called tags. There's 2 tags to add. One is called hide app. It's called Windows Azure Active Directory Integrated App. Took me a while to figure this out on my own, but just thought I'd share this with you while I'm here. Hide app just means, okay, this is a service principal, right? I don't want random people in my organization to know it exists or anything like that. It's just something for our IT department. Hide app just means that it won't show up in my apps. Because in my apps section, and people can access all these apps, right? So if they search for apps, we don't want this app to be shown. So that's what hide app is. Okay, so we got all that. So let's create this app. No. Okay, good thing this happened actually. This is not an issue with my code per se. This is an issue with tokens. Call earlier, there was 2 ways to authenticate, right? There was the token approach, and then there was the connect MG. If I use this, I wouldn't have this error because then it becomes Microsoft's job to refresh my tokens. If you decide that you want to have your own tokens that you run, they have a time limit before it expires. It's okay for automations because your automations aren't going to run that long. And if they are, you're going to have to you'll have to get more and more tokens as you continue in your script. But because mine expired, I believe it has 60 minutes before it expires. I'm just going to run it again. Then I'm going to run all this. Perfect. Single error. Created all that. Double check our work. Go to app registrations. And there it is. SharePoint read write all. I granted it myself and Lee an owner. True. Created a secret. True. It has the year, month, date. Next thing is let's look at key vaults. Key vault secrets. There it is. Enterprise applications. If I search SharePoint, it should show up. There it is in the flesh. And if you go to properties, you see visible teasers. This is what I meant by hide app. You can always switch it on and off. So that's app registration, service principles, enterprise applications in a nutshell. We'll go forward with these service principles when we start automating in automation account runbooks. I still have to showcase APIs deeper, as I said earlier. Either way, see you in the next one.